A nationwide ceasefire in Syria has come into effect. Russia and Turkey finalized the terms of the deal on Wednesday and say they will act as guarantors of the truce. But the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the truce was violated shortly after the deal came into force. Let's go straight to our correspondent, Ali Mustafa, who is live for us in Gaziantep. Sally, what is the latest? Is the ceasefire holding?
Well, on this cold morning on the Turkey-Syria border, Marlene, the ceasefire is holding by and large, but not everyone is on board. Keep in mind, Russia, Turkey have invested a lot of time, a lot of effort, without the US, without the UN input into this process. And now, at midnight last night, it started, and it's hoped that it'll last for at least a month. But there are still reservations, a lot needs to happen. There is a trust deficit, keep in mind, inside Syria between the regime forces of Bashar al-Assad and opposition groups, and not all opposition groups are on board.
Well, give us a sense of how challenging and complicated this ceasefire is to hold, because as you say, not all the groups fighting on the ground are actually involved in this ceasefire.
Well, just to give an idea to our viewers, this is the third time a cessation of hostilities has been attempted on the ground. A Syria-wide, a nationwide cessation of hostilities has been attempted on the ground in Syria. The previous two times, it failed. Why did it fail? Well, because of this mistrust between Russia and the US, between the Syrian regime and opposition groups. And now we see an opposition group, a major opposition group, Erar al-Sham, come out and say that it has reservations, that it will not commit to the cessation of hostilities. One of these reservations has to do with the so-called good groups, or groups that are included in the cessation of hostilities, and groups that are not. And a critical sticking point here is Jabhat al-Fatah al-Sham, the group formerly known as the Nusra Front. According to the Russians, it is not included. It is excluded from the cessation of hostilities, but a lot of Nusra Front fighters are in Idlib province, or in areas which are under the control of so-called good groups. So the opposition fighters, for example, have come out and say there will be no Russian or regime airstrikes in any opposition areas that are part of this agreement, even if they have former Nusra Front fighters. So we'll have to wait and see how these complications, these contradictions play out in the days and weeks ahead, and if this ceasefire will hold.
Ali, the deal also doesn't include the Kurdish YPG, which demonstrates clearly Turkey's strong hand in this. But given the role the YPG have played in the fight against Daesh in Syria, how is that going to complicate things?
Well, that is a very, very good question, Marlene. And also keep in mind that, yes, Turkey's hand is visible, but also visible is the lack of push on the part of the US. The YPG forms the backbone of something called the Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF. The SDF is the major anti-Daesh force fighting inside Syria as far as the US is concerned. So when Turkey comes out and says that the YPG, or the FSA comes out and says the YPG is excluded from this cessation of hostilities, the Russians haven't spoken out on that, so we'll have to wait and see. But it's a major victory for Turkey if this is true, and might not play well in Washington, D.C. as far as the Americans are concerned.
Yeah, so just to touch on that, because for a long time it was the US sort of pushing the ceasefire and pushing for an end to the war in Syria. But now we've got Turkey and Russia with the upper hand here. Is this the US essentially tactically acknowledging that they've failed in Syria? It's now no longer got anything to do with them?
Well, they haven't been given space to acknowledge anything publicly. The US did come out, we saw US officials come out last night in support of this agreement. The UN has also come out, Staffan de Mistura, and says that they will also support this Russia Turkish initiative, but this is a major victory for Russia and Turkey. These are two players inside Syria which have direct involvement as far as opposition groups are concerned, as far as the regime is concerned, and for the U.S. to not be part of this process at this late stage, when the U.S. has played a leading part in the Syrian process, in the Syrian peace process since 2012, since Geneva 1, is something that will not go down well with Washington, D.C. But also keep in mind this is a time of transition in the U.S. U.S. foreign policy as far as Syria is concerned moving forward is still uncertain. Donald Trump has come out and said that he does not believe in regime change, a policy that might have been supported previously as far as Bashar al-Assad was concerned. There are also questions on how Turkey-U.S. will move forward on a transition. The U.S. says it wants to be a part of this transition, which will take place in Kazakhstan sometime in a month or so if the ceasefire holds. But what role will the U.S. or the UN play as far as this political transition is concerned once the ceasefire is over is still unclear.